If electrons actually carried electrical energy through copper wires the way everyone believes, it would take approximately 3 years for the power to travel 10 meters from your wall socket to your lamp, and yet when you flip the switch, the bulb illuminates in a nanosecond. That single fact should tell you that everything you were taught about electricity is built on a flawed mental picture. Everything you think you know about electrical energy, including how it moves, where it travels, and what it actually is, turns out to be almost certainly incorrect. I spent my life wrestling with these invisible forces, and what James Clerk Maxwell's equations revealed, and what I demonstrated through decades of experiment, is that the truth is far stranger, far more beautiful, and far more useful than the comfortable illusion most people carry in their minds. When you turn on that light, you assume the energy comes from the power station and reaches you through the wire, traveling along the copper like water through a pipe. My rival Edison believed exactly this about his direct current, and he was wrong about far more than just the type of current. That picture in your mind, electricity flowing through wire like water through a pipe, is the great misconception that prevents you from seeing how nature actually operates. Once you see it, once you truly grasp what is happening around every wire, every circuit, and every device you have ever used, you will never look at the electrical world the same way again. Consider a simple circuit with a battery, 2 wires, and a light bulb, and notice that when you complete the circuit, the bulb illuminates almost instantly. The electrons in that wire, the actual particles that constitute what you call electric current, move at roughly 1/10 of a millimeter per second, which means a snail moves faster by a wide margin. If electrons were truly carrying the energy through the wire, the way water carries debris down a stream, and those electrons drift slower than a snail, then the light could not possibly illuminate the instant you close the switch. A house wire that runs 10 meters long would require approximately 3 years for the electrons to travel from your wall socket to your lamp at that drift speed. 3 years to light a bulb, and yet the light comes on instantly. Your mental picture of electricity flowing through wires like water through pipes cannot explain this, because that picture is fundamentally wrong. When I was a young man studying at the Polytechnic Institute in Graz, I witnessed something that set the course of my entire life. My professor, the brilliant but limited Dr. Poschel, demonstrated a Grammy dynamo with a wire-wound armature and a commutator that sparked viciously as it operated. I observed those sparks and immediately saw the problem, and I told him it might be possible to operate such a motor without these troublesome brushes, without the sparking, without the mechanical contact that wore down and wasted energy. He laughed at me and delivered an entire lecture explaining why my idea was impossible. His exact words to the class were that I may accomplish great things, but I certainly would never do this because it would be equivalent to converting a steadily pulling force, like that of gravity, into a rotary effort, and he called it a perpetual motion scheme, an impossible idea. But instinct is something which transcends knowledge, and we have certain finer fibers that enable us to perceive truths when logical deduction or any other willful effort of brain is futile. I knew I was right because I could feel it, and the solution existed somewhere in nature, waiting to be discovered. For years, I thought about this problem by picturing in my mind direct current machines running and following the changing flow of currents in the armature. I imagined alternators and investigated the processes taking place in a similar manner, and I visualized systems comprising motors and generators and operated them in various ways. The pictures I saw were to me perfectly real and tangible. This ability to visualize, to construct working models in my mind and operate them mentally before ever building anything physical was my greatest gift. From childhood, I trained myself in this faculty, and I would conceive of an invention, perfect it entirely in my imagination, and only then build it in material form. When the physical device was completed, it worked exactly as I had envisioned, with every dimension, every interaction, and every behavior precisely as I had seen it in my mind. This method saved me enormous amounts of time and material, because other inventors would rush to build prototypes, waste resources on failed designs, and iterate through dozens of physical versions before achieving success. I worked out my problems mentally, testing and refining my ideas in the laboratory of my imagination, where experiments cost nothing and failures taught their lessons instantly. It was through this faculty of mental visualization that I first grasped the rotating magnetic field, and I did not derive it mathematically, though the mathematics later confirmed what I had seen. I did not stumble upon it through trial and error with physical apparatus, because I saw it complete and operational, projected before my eyes as if it were a real machine running in the afternoon light of a Budapest park. That afternoon in Budapest changed everything. I was walking in the city park with my friend Sigeti, reciting poetry from Goethe's Faust and watching the sun set. The glorious passage came to my lips about the glow retreating and the day of toil being done, about hastening yonder to explore new fields of life. And in that instant, as if struck by lightning, I saw it. The rotating magnetic field appeared before me, not as a theory and not as a calculation, but operating before my eyes as clearly as if it were a physical machine constructed of iron and copper. I cried to Sigeti to watch me reverse it, and I drew the diagrams in the sand with a stick, showing him how the magnetic field rotates and drags the armature around with it. I told him it was beautiful, it was sublime, it was simple. I had solved the problem because a rotating magnetic field could be created not by mechanical rotation, but by the interplay of alternating currents out of phase with each other. The field itself would rotate, and any conductor placed within it would be dragged along, with no brushes, no commutators, and no sparking contacts, just pure electromagnetic action. My professor had called it impossible, because he was thinking of electricity the wrong way. He thought of it as something that flowed through wires, that needed mechanical intervention to change direction, and that required physical contact to transfer power. But electricity is not a substance, and it is a condition of space, a state of the invisible medium that surrounds us. This is the insight that must reshape your understanding. Electrical energy does not travel inside wires, and it travels in the space around them. When you close that switch and the light illuminates instantly, the battery or the generator at the power station creates an electromagnetic disturbance. This disturbance propagates outward at nearly the speed of light, not through the copper, but through the empty space surrounding the copper. The wire serves as a guide, a boundary condition that shapes and directs this invisible field of force. But the energy itself moves through what appears to be nothing at all. Picture a wire carrying current, and notice that around that wire, two fields exist simultaneously. An electric field created by the charges on the surface of the conductor extends radially outward, and a magnetic field created by the movement of those charges wraps around the wire in concentric circles. These two fields, perpendicular to each other, combine to create a flow of energy. This flow of energy points directly into the wire because the energy comes from outside, enters the conductor, and is there converted into heat, light, motion, or whatever work the circuit performs. The wire does not transport the energy like a pipe transports water, and instead the wire receives the energy from the surrounding field, like a cup held out in the rain. John Henry Poynting, building on Maxwell's field equations, worked out the mathematics of this in his 1884 paper published in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society, but I had already grasped the principle through visualization and experiment. Michael Faraday had discovered electromagnetic induction decades earlier, but even Faraday did not fully articulate that the energy traveled through the field rather than through the conductor itself. When you understand that energy flows through fields rather than through matter, everything makes sense, including the instant illumination of the light bulb, the ability to transmit power across vast distances with minimal loss, and the possibility of wireless transmission of energy, which becomes not just explained, but inevitable. Let me make this concrete with an example that should astonish you. Imagine two wires running parallel to each other, separated by a meter of empty air, with one wire connected to a power source and the other to a load, such as a motor or a lamp. According to the common misconception, electricity flows through the first wire, somehow jumps across to the second wire, and powers the device. But this is not what happens at all. The current in the first wire creates electromagnetic fields that extend outward into space, and these fields encounter the second wire and induce currents within it. The energy has traveled through the air, through the supposedly empty space between the wires, guided and shaped by the electromagnetic properties of the arrangement. The wires establish the conditions, the geometry, and the boundary that gives the field its form, but the energy itself passes through what we mistakenly call nothing. This is how a transformer works, with two coils of wire electrically isolated from each other and no physical connection whatsoever. Energy passes from one to the other with remarkable efficiency because the primary coil establishes an alternating magnetic field. This field links with the secondary coil and induces a voltage within it, and the energy has crossed the gap between the coils, traveling through the magnetic medium of space itself. Stop and consider what this means for your understanding of reality, because you have been surrounded by transformers your entire life, in your appliances, in the power distribution system, and in countless devices you take for granted. In every single one of them, energy is jumping across gaps of empty space, carried by nothing but invisible fields of force. Every time you place your phone on a wireless charging pad, you witness this principle in action, as energy leaps from the pad into your device through pure electromagnetic induction with no physical contact whatsoever. This is not exotic physics, but ordinary, everyday technology that operates on principles most people fundamentally misunderstand. I demonstrated this principle in dramatic fashion during my lectures by holding a glass tube filled with gas, with no wires connected to it whatsoever, and it would glow brilliantly in my hand. The audience would gasp, thinking it was magic or trickery, but it was neither. The electromagnetic fields from my apparatus radiating through the lecture hall were sufficient to excite the gas and produce light, and energy was flowing through space, through air, and through my own body, with no material conductor to carry it. On another occasion, I illuminated incandescent lamps that had no wires attached to them at all, and they simply sat on a table, glowing with brilliant light, drawing their energy entirely from the electromagnetic fields that permeated the room. Today you use this same principle when you brush your teeth with an electric toothbrush that charges on its base with no exposed metal contacts, or when you cook on an induction stovetop that heats the pan through magnetic fields rather than flame. The very existence of wireless lighting, wireless charging, and induction heating proves that the common understanding has always been incomplete. When I grasped this principle fully, I realized something that still fills me with wonder, because the Earth itself is an immense reservoir of electrical energy. Whatever electricity may be, it is a fact that it behaves like an incompressible fluid, and the Earth may be looked upon as an enormous conductor that can be disturbed effectively by a properly designed electrical machine. At my laboratory in Colorado Springs, I proved this beyond doubt by constructing a magnifying transmitter capable of producing electrical pressures of 12 million volts, discharges that surpass the natural displays of lightning in their intensity. With this apparatus, I discovered that the planet, despite its vast extent, behaved like a conductor of limited dimensions. Impossible as it seemed, I was observing stationary waves in the Earth itself. The discovery came to me one night as I was walking home with my assistant, meditating on strange observations we had made. My instruments were being affected more strongly by lightning discharges occurring at great distances than by those striking nearby, and this puzzled me greatly because I could not understand what would cause such a paradox. And that's when the answer struck me like a revelation, because the Earth was exhibiting resonance. When a lightning bolt struck the planet, it set up waves of electrical disturbance that propagated around the entire globe, reflected back, and interfered with each other to form standing patterns. My receiving apparatus, positioned at certain distances, was detecting the nodes and antinodes of these planetary-scale oscillations. No doubt, whatever remained, I was observing stationary waves. As the source of the disturbances moved away, my receiving circuit came successively upon their nodes and loops, those points of maximum and minimum intensity in the standing wave pattern. I experimented further by sending electrical impulses into the ground and detecting their return after they had traveled around the Earth. The time required for this journey I carefully measured and calculated, and to traverse the entire distance of approximately 25,000 miles, equal to the circumference of the globe, the current required a certain time interval that I was able to determine with precision. Modern geophysicists have since confirmed exactly what I measured, and they call these planetary electromagnetic oscillations the Schumann resonances, with the fundamental frequency occurring at 7.83 Hz. which is the electromagnetic heartbeat of the Earth itself pulsing in the cavity between the planet's surface and the ionosphere. In yielding this knowledge, nature has revealed one of its most precious secrets, of inestimable consequence to humanity. Think about what this means, because the planet we stand upon is not electrically inert, and it is alive with electromagnetic activity. The Earth and its conducting atmosphere form a kind of enormous electrical resonator, and with the proper apparatus, one can set up standing waves of electromagnetic energy that encompass the entire globe. The tremendous significance of this fact for the transmission of energy became clear to me at once. Not only was it practicable to send messages to any distance without wires, which I had recognized long ago, but far more important, it was possible to transmit power in unlimited amounts to any terrestrial distance with almost no loss. The common view holds that if you want to send electricity from one place to another, you must string wires between them. Every mile of wire adds resistance, every mile wastes energy as heat, and the longer the distance, the greater the loss. This is why power stations must be built relatively close to the populations they serve, why massive transmission lines crisscross our landscapes, and why we have resigned ourselves to this infrastructure of copper and steel. But this view is based on the misconception that energy travels through the wire. Once you understand that energy travels through fields, you see that the wire is merely a guide, not a vessel. And if you can establish the proper field conditions, you can guide that energy anywhere, even without a wire to define the path. Throughout space there is energy, and the question is whether this energy is static or kinetic. If static, our hopes are in vain, but if kinetic, and this we know it is for certain, then it is a mere question of time when men will succeed in attaching their machinery to the very wheelwork of nature. Let me return to your light bulb and rebuild your understanding from the ground up. When you close the switch, an electromagnetic disturbance begins at the battery or generator, and this disturbance consists of linked electric and magnetic fields that propagate outward at nearly 300 million meters per second, the speed of light. Within a nanosecond, this disturbance has traveled meters, and within a microsecond, it has traveled hundreds of meters. As this electromagnetic wave encounters the wire, it is guided along the wire's surface, and the fields outside the wire set up the conditions. The electric field parallel to the wire drives the electrons in the conductor to move, not to transport energy, but to move in response to the field. This electron motion is the current, and it produces its own magnetic field, which combines with the electric field to create the energy flow into the wire. The electrons themselves are not moving fast at all because they drift slowly, back and forth in alternating current, barely budging from their original positions. They are like the molecules of water in a wave, where the wave travels fast, but the water molecules barely move. A guitar string vibrates in this same pattern, with the wave of sound traveling outward while the string itself only oscillates in place, and the standing waves I detected spanning the entire planet follow the same principle that makes music possible. The energy is in the wave, in the pattern of disturbance, not in the transport of matter. When this electromagnetic energy reaches the filament of the light bulb, it flows inward from the fields surrounding the filament, and the filament offers resistance to the passage of the electromagnetic disturbance, converting the electromagnetic energy into heat and light. The energy came from the power station, guided by wires through space, delivered by fields to the glowing filament. This is what you see when you turn on a light, not electricity flowing through pipes, but energy propagating through fields, guided by conductors and converted by resistance into the radiance that illuminates your room. Now consider how this changes everything you thought you knew about electrical systems. Those massive transmission lines you see stretching across the countryside are not pipelines full of flowing electrons. They are guides that shape the electromagnetic fields, carrying power from generating stations to cities, and the energy travels alongside the wires, in the space between them, in the insulation around them, and in the air and the vacuum that surrounds them. When electrical engineers design these systems, they think in terms of voltage and current, of resistance and reactance, and these are convenient abstractions for calculation. But the deeper reality is that they are designing the geometry of electromagnetic fields, because the spacing between wires matters due to how it affects the field configuration. The insulation matters because energy flows through it. and the height above the ground matters because the Earth is part of the electromagnetic system. Consider what happens when you have two parallel transmission lines strung side by side across the landscape, because engineers worry about crosstalk, which is energy from one line affecting the other. In the pipe model of electricity, this would make no sense, because water flowing through one pipe could not affect water flowing through a separate pipe running parallel to it. But in the field model, it makes perfect sense because the electromagnetic fields of one line extend outward into space and interact with the other line, and energy is literally leaking from one circuit to another through the shared space between them. Or consider radio interference and the reason an electric motor sometimes causes static on your radio. The sparks in the motor's brushes create electromagnetic disturbances that propagate through space, the same space through which radio signals travel, and these disturbances interfere with the radio's reception. If electricity truly traveled only through wires, such interference would be impossible. But electricity does not travel through wires, and the energy associated with electrical systems fills the space around those systems, space that is shared with radio waves, light waves, and every other form of electromagnetic radiation. This understanding reveals possibilities that the common misconception conceals. If energy flows through fields rather than through matter, then matter is not strictly necessary for energy transmission, and the fields can be established without continuous material guides. The energy can be directed through the natural medium of space itself. At the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, George Westinghouse and I demonstrated my polyphase alternating current system to the world, and the entire fair was illuminated by electricity, generated and distributed using my patents. More than 27 million visitors witnessed the power of alternating current, saw the beauty of electrical illumination, and experienced the future that my inventions had made possible. 3 years later, in 1896, my system powered the Niagara Falls hydroelectric plant, the first large-scale alternating current power station, transmitting electricity 26 miles to Buffalo, New York, and proving beyond any doubt that AC power could light cities and drive industry across great distances. But what I demonstrated at Chicago was only the beginning. At my exhibit, I showed an egg of copper standing upright and spinning in the center of a ring of coils, with no motor driving it and no mechanical connection touching it. The rotating magnetic field I had envisioned in Budapest years before was dragging that egg around, making it spin and stand on end through pure electromagnetic action. The audience saw magic, but I saw the principle that would transform the world. To truly understand what was happening to that egg, you must abandon the notion that electrical forces require contact. The coils around the egg were connected to polyphase alternating current, multiple currents, offset in time from each other, reaching their peaks at different moments. As these currents rose and fell in their prescribed sequence, they created magnetic fields that also rose and fell, but because of the phase relationships and the timing offsets between the currents, these individual magnetic fields combined to produce a single resultant field that appeared to rotate around the ring. There was nothing mechanical about this rotation because no part moved. The fields themselves rotated, sweeping around the ring like an invisible hand, and this rotating field induced currents in the copper egg. These induced currents created their own magnetic field, which interacted with the rotating field to produce a torque, a twisting force that set the egg spinning. The egg then stood upright because the centrifugal effect of its own rotation naturally oriented it along its longest axis. This is electromagnetic induction in its purest form, where a changing magnetic field induces an electric current. That induced current creates its own magnetic field, and the interaction of fields produces motion. No brushes, no commutators, and no physical contact of any kind, just the invisible dance of electromagnetic forces through empty space. That same rotating magnetic field, properly scaled, now powers virtually every motor in civilization. From the smallest fans in your computers to the largest pumps in your factories, from the motors in your vehicles to the generators in your power stations, all of them depend on the principle I visualized that afternoon in the Budapest park. And still, most people misunderstand what is happening inside these machines because they think of current flowing, of electrons moving, and of forces acting on wires. But the fundamental action is the rotating field, an invisible pattern of electromagnetic force that sweeps around the motor, dragging the rotor along with it as surely as a whirlpool drags a floating cork. Here is what I want you to take from this. Your intuition about electrical energy has been shaped by inadequate analogies. You have been told that electricity flows like water, that wires are like pipes, and that batteries are like pumps. But these comparisons are not merely imprecise, because they actively mislead you and prevent you from seeing the true nature of electromagnetic phenomena. Water flows because the molecules of water actually move from one place to another, and the energy of a waterfall is the kinetic energy of moving water. But in electrical systems, the charges barely move at all, and the energy is carried by fields, invisible and intangible patterns of electric and magnetic force that propagate through space at the speed of light. When you understand this, you stop thinking of electrical engineering as plumbing with electrons, and you begin to think of it as the art of shaping invisible fields of force. You understand why transformers work without any physical connection between their windings, why antennas can broadcast and receive energy across empty space, and why the dream of wireless power transmission is not fantasy, but inevitable technological progress. The electromagnetic field is the great mediator that carries energy from one place to another, from one time to another, linking cause and effect across distances that seemed unbridgeable. When the sun shines on your face, you feel energy that left a star 8 minutes ago, carried across 93 million miles of vacuum by electromagnetic waves. When you listen to radio, you receive energy that has propagated through space from a distant transmitter. And these are not different phenomena, but all manifestations of the same fundamental principle. And here is the beautiful part. The same fields that carry radio signals can carry power. The same medium that transmits the faint whispers of radio waves can transmit the tremendous energies required to light cities and drive factories, and the difference is merely one of scale and engineering, not of fundamental physics. I have seen, in my mind's eye, a world transformed by this understanding, with power stations feeding energy not into networks of copper wire, but into the earth and atmosphere themselves, establishing standing waves of electromagnetic force that any properly tuned receiver can tap. Vehicles would draw their energy from fields that permeate the air, needing no fuel tanks, no charging stations, and no cumbersome batteries. Ships at sea would be powered by transmitted energy, and aircraft would be sustained in flight by broadcast power. These visions are not fantasy, but the logical extension of principles that have been demonstrated and proven. The only barriers are engineering challenges, significant challenges to be sure, but not fundamental impossibilities. The laws of physics do not forbid wireless power transmission, but enable it, and have always enabled it, and we simply needed to understand them correctly. So astounding are the facts in this connection that it would seem as though the Creator himself had electrically designed this planet just for the purpose of enabling us to achieve wonders which, before my discoveries, could not have been conceived by the wildest imagination. The Earth is alive with electrical vibrations, and I have listened to them. In my Colorado laboratory, I detected thunderclaps from storms 500 miles distant and measured standing waves that traveled around the entire circumference of the globe and returned to their point of origin. The planet rings like a bell with electromagnetic energy, and we, with our devices, can strike that bell and make it sing. This is not mysticism but physics, and the equations that describe electromagnetic fields are precise and mathematical, while the experiments that demonstrate their behavior are reproducible and exact. What I have told you is not speculation but observed fact, tested and confirmed over more than a century since my original demonstrations. But the common understanding has not caught up because in schools, in textbooks, and in the minds of ordinary people, electricity still flows like water through pipes of copper. This misconception is not merely academic because it limits what people believe to be possible. It constrains their imagination, and it blinds them to the magnificent reality that surrounds them every moment of every day. I have encountered this blindness countless times, and when I proposed wireless transmission of power, I was met with skepticism bordering on ridicule. The very idea of energy traveling without wires seemed to contradict everything people thought they knew about electricity. But their knowledge was based on the false metaphor of flowing water, and once you abandon that metaphor and see the fields clearly, wireless power becomes not only possible, but obviously possible. The same energy that lights your lamp could light a lamp across the ocean, if only the proper conditions were established. The fields do not care about distance because they propagate at the speed of light, covering any span in mere fractions of a second. The challenge is efficiency, ensuring that the energy arrives at its intended destination rather than dissipating into the vastness of space. But this is an engineering challenge, not a physical impossibility. My Wardenclyffe Tower was designed to solve this challenge as the first transmission station for wireless power, capable of broadcasting energy to receivers anywhere on Earth. Financial difficulties and the withdrawal of my backer, J.P. Morgan, prevented its completion, but the principles were sound and remain sound. In Japan today, engineers at JAXA are designing the space solar power system to collect sunlight in orbit and beam it to Earth as microwaves. In New Zealand, a company called Emrod has successfully transmitted power wirelessly across distances of several kilometers using focused electromagnetic beams. In laboratories and startups around the world, researchers are working on resonant inductive coupling, microwave power transmission, and laser power beaming. What I envisioned is no longer someday, and the world I imagined is being built now, piece by piece, by engineers who finally understand that energy travels through fields, not through wires. The next time you flip a switch, pause for just a moment and consider what is really happening. The battery or generator establishes an electromagnetic disturbance, and this disturbance propagates outward at nearly the speed of light, not through the copper, but through the space that the copper merely guides and shapes. The electric field pushes on the electrons in the wire, causing them to drift slowly back and forth, and the magnetic field curls around the wire in response to this movement. Together, these perpendicular fields create a flow of energy that moves from the source toward the load, entering the wire from outside, converting electromagnetic energy into whatever work the circuit performs. All of this happens in an instant. All of this happens invisibly, and all of this happens in perfect accordance with laws of nature that are precise, mathematical, and beautiful beyond measure. This is what electrical energy really is, not the dull flow of charged particles through copper tubes. It is the dance of invisible fields through the fabric of space, guided by matter, but not contained by it, carrying power from where it is generated to where it is needed at the speed of light itself. Not a substance to be pumped, but a phenomenon to be shaped. And once you see it, you will never be able to unsee it.